problem is so many people who are abused are taught to just hold all of that abuse in, by managers or friends or whoever in life. Just put it up on some shelf, forget it. It's not worth your time, but you can't help but let it out. So you keep complaining, oh please let me out, let me let it out, let me let it out. And then eventually you get so anxious and filled with anxiety that you have to just explode, right? And then while you have people, in some cases that are taught, well, okay, so if you have to have that feeling to let it out, then to let it out on a target or a proxy target. Don't just let it eat yourself, but just like let it out, like get catharsis. And the problem with that is that that's the least likely thing to help you get past your rage or sadness. I mean, fighting and screaming at people or punching things, sometimes even like shooting guns, really anything violent that really just is like what people call catharsis. Those are all just emotional amplifiers. Yeah, sure, it feels good to get catharsis. It feels really good, hell, but that's momentary. You get this momentary high. It's like a drug, and all that shit that you've been holding up on the shelf, you get to take it down and show people and say, hey, look at this, but it's really important. Look at me. For a moment, you're being seen. You're being what you think is hearing until later on, of course. And that's what people don't really talk about. It's what happens after that, right? You take something off the shelf, you got to put it back up on the shelf. What else are you going to do with it? It's not gone, and you haven't broken it down, you haven't analyzed it, you haven't figured out maybe like where it should go, rather than the shelf, So you put it back. And what happens? Well, if you've got this tool where it's like, oh, well, catharsis, I mean, it makes me feel really good. Well, now sort of you got the tools to keep doing it, and there isn't really any reason to stop doing it. I mean, for one, it makes you feel really good. You get this catharsis, and you just let it go, and then you feel seen, and then you put it back on the shelf, and you keep, rinse, wash, repeat. I think that's the saying. You keep doing it. You keep doing it. But, I think, like any drug, the problem with that is that eventually that catharsis starts to feel a little dull. It's not as strong. The high isn't as strong. You don't feel as seen. You keep saying the same things over and over to people, and they still just aren't getting it. That catharsis that you were getting from finally ramming it in there and saying, yes, finally, they understand. But when they don't understand, or when they come back and they still feel the same ways that you thought that you've been fighting all this time, or whatever it is, or you get this punching sensation, and you get this feeling in your body like I've just destroyed the target, and then you come back to the real world and you realize that you've destroyed nothing, you've changed nothing, that that all that power that you've just exerted doesn't actually have a net effect on the things that you would want it to, in the ways that you would want it to. All you're left with is just a whole bunch of shit strewn on the ground, and then you pick it back up and you put it on the shelf, because that's all you know how to do. And it just becomes this cyclical thing. You keep using and using and using, and each time it gets less and less effective, and so you have to do it more. You have to, if it's not working, once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, if it's not working, then you got to keep doing it until you are just an abuser. And that is poetic because of the obvious drug abuse metaphor, but also it's true. It's literally drug use. It's you're searching for a chemical release in your brain that only a certain activity or action can give you, that you've trained your brain to become dependent on. You are addicted to anger, and it makes you feel like better for a second, but eventually it just doesn't, and then all you are is anger and bitterness and rage, and that eventually corrodes your soul, because eventually you run out of people in your life to bring pain to. Eventually you run out of people to try and warp and manipulate and change into who you want them to be. And it's usually not until you get to that point where you've corroded your entire life that you finally realize that this isn't what you want, that this isn't the way. And then by then you've got a lot of work to do to heal, and it's sometimes too much. What is the real source of this frustration? You have to work to find that out. You just have to. There isn't any easy way to figure it out, and nobody really knows. That's why we have therapy. You need to let things out in a way that people can actually read, because it feels like when you're angry that you're actually just trying to say something to somebody, right? But not everybody is able to read between the lines. You may get lucky and find somebody who realizes that your anger is actually just masking some deeper, more complex emotion, and that's if you're really lucky, though. But most people, they have their own shit to deal with anyways, and they just aren't that good. They just aren't good enough to see, all they can see is just some guy that's yelling at them. They don't know if it's like from years of abuse, or if it's a temporary thing. All they know is they want to get out of that situation. They don't want to be a part of that. It makes it impossible for them to read. That's what rage and anger does. And sometimes, there's some overlap, because like depression and anxiety and all these other things can also make you difficult to read. You can purposely avoid people. You can make everything you say a puzzle that people have to decode, and most people just don't have that. They don't have that energy. They can't hold that space for you. And so, in my mind, the language of vulnerability is more than just letting yourself feel the things you feel and being honest about what you're feeling. It's also learning how to communicate those feelings in a way that makes them easier to read for people. It's most people will give you cues as to how they're prepared to accept vulnerability. So like there are definitely like some people who are capable of reading vulnerability in your anger, right, and picking that apart. But there's definitely like people that don't respond to that. Some people are more comfortable with vulnerability when it comes through sharing experiences, or some people are more comfortable with vulnerability when it comes, from some kind of sexual contact. There's a lot of different ways that vulnerability can be accepted, but people will usually leave subconscious hints about what it is that they're willing to accept as it's like a docking mechanism almost. Like they're showing you like, okay, this is the shape of my heart, this is the shape of my vulnerability receptor, if you will, and I need you to find a way to put what it is your issue is into this shape so that I can receive it. And sometimes it's not always so easy to do that. Sometimes people's docks, for vulnerability are just too warped or weird, or sometimes they don't exist at all. Some people are just completely closed off, But it's really a skill. It's not just a passive thing, and it's certainly not a weakness. In fact, it is a great strength. If you can develop your language of vulnerability, then you can develop strong bonds and connections with a lot of different types of people from all walks of life. And importantly, you can have somewhere where you can deposit all of these things, and instead of just taking them off the shelf, sometimes you can leave them with the people. You can say, here's this gift, my vulnerability to you, and it's not so lonely, anymore. Not because you feel like they totally understand you, but because they have a little piece of what makes you you. And being able to look back and see all of the different factors that you've spread out through the world is a lot easier, and you can truly appreciate humanity as this like reception device for your pain. And in the same way, once you've been able to release that, you realize that you've also got this space that intellectually you understand, like, okay, well, like, all these people have been able to do this for me, and I know that by them having these different shapes, that they were able to receive my vulnerability. And I know that other people maybe don't have the same skill set that I have. And so one thing that I know that I can do is, if somebody wants to give me their vulnerability, I can try to also be adaptable in the way that I approach them. And so I can receive them easier as well. And that becomes much easier once you are received, because you know all of these little, just subconscious little cues that people have left you, of how, like, it's like feeling people out lets you know what it is that you're projecting. The things, and the more you learn about other people, the more you learn about yourself. And so you're able to sort of more naturally receive people, and then that can really give you, like, good sense of, like, just fulfillment, that, hey, look, I know what it is to be this, but I also am here, and I'm ready to receive it. Here's the thing. You need vulnerability. It's not a question of, well, sometimes it's okay to just be vulnerable, but sometimes you really gotta, like, play your cards right. It's not something that you use like a Swiss Army knife. Vulnerability is a language we all need to be speaking in as much and as often as possible, with as many people as possible. Because that's the only way that we're ever going to adapt as a species to become closer. I don't believe that there's anything more powerful than understanding. I don't believe there is anything more significant than allowing yourself the feeling of being received, and allowing yourself the feeling of receiving others. I don't believe that there's anything that supersedes that. I think religion, political beliefs, all of it stems, whatever, all of it stems from a common root of the person that I'm talking to either is willing to receive me or isn't. They're either open to seeing things and inhabiting the world the way that I inhabit it, or they aren't. And if you don't establish that connection, if you don't establish that, if you aren't willing to do that, if you don't have the space to do that, if you haven't healed on your own, if you have all this pain still up on a shelf and you're still just in this addicted state, and you just let life pass you by in that state, and you never really work on the skill of vulnerability, if you never work on learning the language of vulnerability, then I truly believe that you will never be able to influence someone to change their heart, because that's what really changes minds. Say what you will about data, empirical evidence. I could machine gun facts into somebody's face, and none of it would matter if their heart wasn't willing to change. The heart is all there is. The metaphorical heart, the spirit, the thing that makes us us, the thing that shows us how to receive the world. You know, that needs to be something which is adaptable. It needs to be something that can be fluid, and it has to be something that people can touch if you ever want to be able to connect, because influence isn't pushing, it isn't force, it's a connection. It's bigger than you. It's allowing yourself to be bonded with a larger human community, and that bond moves through time and space independent of any individual's will. All we can ever be is willing participants, or things that just completely shut themselves off. We can be solipsistic, or we can connect ourselves to, the nerve system, the rhizomes, and say, we're a part of this, and allow ourselves to be as influenced as we are willing to influence. And that's all the influence is, nothing else. I don't know what any of this was about, but maybe it means something.